Welcome back to the deep dive. We're so glad you're here. So today I want to start with a little visualization exercise. I want to put a phrase in your head and just, see where your brain goes. You're up.
Always ready.
Okay. School safety. When I say those two words, what's the image that immediately hits your mind? What's the stock photo?
If I'm being honest, it's hardware. My brain goes straight to the physical stuff. I'm picturing, those heavy reinforced doors with the narrow windows. I can hear that buzzing sound of a magnetic lock.
Yeah.
I see surveillance cameras in the corners of the ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
maybe ID badges if we're really going down that rabbit hole, probably even metal detectors.
Right. It's a fortress, it's walls, it's a whole list of things designed to keep bad things out. And that is the dominant narrative we've been fed for, 20 years? But today we are diving into a stack of sources that argues we have been looking at this completely backward. We're looking at a really fascinating conversation from Risk to Resilience, the Culture Shift podcast, hosted by Cee Cee and featuring a subject matter expert named Clarence C. And the thesis here is going to sound almost, dangerously soft to someone who's obsessed with security gadgets.
It really is a paradigm shift. I mean, the argument in this material is that you can have the most expensive fortified bunker in the world. You can have the cameras, the locks, all of it. But if you do not have a psychological foundation of safety, that building is effectively insecure.
So it's the difference between being secure, like locked down, and actually being safe.
Exactly. And the core variable here, the electricity that has to run through that whole system, is trust.
See, and I have to stop you there, because usually when I hear the word trust in a corporate or an educational setting, I kind of roll my eyes. It feels like a poster in a guidance counselor's office. It feels fuzzy.
Nice to have.
And nice to have, exactly. But what grabbed me about this deep dive is that Clarence C. isn't talking about trust as some warm, fuzzy vibe. He's talking about it as a mechanic, like a piece of structural engineering.
That's the key distinction.
Yeah.
He frames it as the absolute bedrock of physical safety. And this is the big so what of the whole thing. If you don't have trust, all those cameras and drills become what White calls performative safety.
Performative safety. That is a stinging phrase. It implies we're just acting.
It's safety theater. It's checking boxes so you can tell the insurance company or the parents, look, we did the thing.
Yeah.
But think about it practically. If a student sees a threat on social media, but doesn't trust the adults enough to report it.
The camera didn't help.
Right. Or if a teacher notices a door is broken, but doesn't trust the administration enough to speak up because they think they'll get blamed. The lock didn't help. If the human software is buggy, the hardware just fails.
So our mission today is to take trust out of the realm of feelings and, HR buzzwords and put it into the realm of strategy. We need to look at how it breaks, how you build it, and the frankly terrifying reality of what happens when you have to fix it.
And we should probably start with the breakage. Because according to the source material, most schools, and honestly, most organizations, are operating in the red.
This is what they call the trust deficit.
Right. We're overdrawn. And Clarence C. identifies 3 specific drivers of this deficit. Think of these as the 3 distinct ways you drain the bank account.
Okay, let's run through them. What's the first drain?
The first one is inconsistency.
Inconsistency. Now, is that just a polite word for hypocrisy?
It can be, but it's a little more nuanced than that. It's about the gap between what's said and what's done. But psychologically, it's really about unpredictability. The human brain, it craves pattern recognition. We need to know that if X happens, Y will result.
So if a leader enforces the dress code strictly on Monday because they had a good coffee,
but ignores it on Tuesday because they're tired.
Exactly.
Or if the safety plan says all visitors must sign in, but the principal just waves their friend through the side door, that registers in your brain as a threat. It says the rules aren't real.
And if the rules aren't real, I can't rely on you to protect me.
You got it. It creates this low-level anxiety.
Yeah.
You just don't know which version of leadership you're getting today.
Okay.
And that leads directly to the second driver, invisibility.
That is a much heavier word, invisibility.
Yeah, it refers to that experience of students, staff, even families feeling like they're just cogs in the machine. It's the sensation that you could disappear or your problem could disappear and the system just wouldn't notice or care.
I think we've all felt that at some job. You voice a concern, maybe it's about a safety issue, maybe just workload, and it goes into a black hole. You never hear back.
That's the classic example. If a teacher says, hey, I'm burnt out, or a student says, this hallway feels dangerous between periods, and the response is just silence, that person creates a narrative. They tell themselves, I don't matter here. And here's the kicker for safety. You cannot trust a system that you don't believe sees you.
If I'm invisible to you, you certainly aren't going to protect me when the fire alarm goes off.
Bingo. And that leads to the third driver, which is inaction.
Which feels related to the first two, but distinct.
Oh yeah, they feed each other. Inaction is specifically about the open secret. It's when there are known issues. Everyone knows the PA system doesn't work in the gym, or everyone knows that one teacher is verbally abusive, or everyone knows the bullying policy isn't enforced.
But nobody does anything about it.
Right. Leadership just walks past it every day. It's the elephant in the room. And that inaction, it screams that comfort, specifically the leader's comfort, is more important than the community's safety. White emphasizes that when you have these three, inconsistency, invisibility, and inaction, you are deep in a trust deficit.
And in that state, your safety plan is just a PDF that nobody even reads.
Correct. There's a quote from the source that I think should be, I don't know, painted on the wall of every administrative office. People follow people, not policies.
People follow people, not policies. It's such a simple truth, isn't it? But we act like it isn't. We spend millions on the policy binders and the consultants.
But if the person handing me the binder has made me feel invisible or has been totally inconsistent, I'm not reading the binder. And more importantly, in a crisis, I'm not looking at the binder. I'm looking at the leader. And if I don't trust them, panic sets in.
Okay, so we've depressed everyone. We know how to drain the account. We know how to break the system. Now I want to get into the construction phase. How do we earn it back? And the source makes this really interesting point that school isn't a monolith. You can't just build trust with the school.
Right, that's a total rookie mistake. The school is a complex web of different tribes. The source maps out the stakeholders. You have staff, students, families, and leadership. And the key insight here is differentiation.
Meaning what works for one group is going to fail with another.
Absolutely. One size fits all is a trust killer. I mean, imagine a principal using the same tone and strategy with a 14-year-old student that they use with a 40-year-old union rep.
Oof, it's going to misfire with both of them.
Terribly. You have to tailor the approach.
So let's break down the tactics.
Right.
The source was very specific here. Let's start with the staff, the teachers, the custodians, the admins. What is the currency of trust for them?
For the adults in the building, the currency is transparency. But, and this is a really big distinction, it's not just transparency about what is happening. It's transparency about the why.
Context.
Context is everything. Adults have a need for cognitive closure. If you just say, we're changing the lunch schedule starting Monday and stop there, the rumor mill just explodes. Oh, they're cutting costs, or they're trying to punish us, or administration is just bored.
We fill in the blanks with our own anxieties.
We always assume the worst. So building trust means saying, we are changing the schedule because we noticed overcrowding in the cafeteria creates safety issues, and we hope this specific change alleviates that stress.
So even if I hate the change, I at least trust the reasoning.
Exactly.
Yeah?
You've been treated like an adult partner in the problem-solving process.
Okay, so for staff, it's explaining the why. What about students? Because kids, they have a brutal radar for phoniness. You can't spin them.
Yeah, you can't. And their memory for broken promises is photographic. For students, the metric is simpler and higher follow-through.
The Sadie ratio.
Clarence C. argues that for kids, trust is binary. It's either on or it's off. If an adult says, I'll look into that, or come see me tomorrow, and then they just forget,
You're done.
you are filed away as another adult who lies.
That feels terrifyingly high stakes. Like one mistake and you're out.
It is high stakes. But it's also liberating, in a way. You don't need to be cool. You don't need to be their best friend or know the latest slang. You just need to be impeccable with your word. If you promise a follow-up, you have to deliver, even if the answer is no.
I actually think kids respect a no if it's an honest no that's delivered when you promised it would be.
100%. It signals respect. It says, I remembered you.
All right, let's move to the third group, the families. This feels like the hardest group right now. There's just so much tension between schools and parents.
It's a very, very charged relationship.
So how do you bridge that? Because my instinct would be to just hide.
Well, the source suggests a pivot from broadcasting to communication.
What's the difference?
Most schools think they're communicating because they send out a newsletter, a robocall, 5 emails a week. That's broadcasting. That's just throwing information at people. Building trust requires a feedback loop. It requires asking, what do you need? What are you seeing?
But playing devil's advocate here, that sounds exhausting for a leader. If I open the floodgates to parent opinions, aren't I just inviting 1,000 complaints?
It is scary. But the source argues that the alternative is way worse. If you don't give families a constructive channel to be heard, they will create their own channels, usually on Facebook or in the parking lot, and those channels will be toxic. By inviting the input, you validate their role. You make them visible.
It goes right back to invisibility. If I never ask you what you think, I'm telling you I don't care.
Exactly. Even if you can't solve every single problem, the act of listening builds the bridge.
And finally, we have to look at the leaders themselves. How do they establish that baseline credibility?
The source puts this squarely on accountability.
Which usually means modeling.
It's the old cliche, but it's just inescapable.
Mm.
You cannot ask staff to be punctual if you roll in late with a latte. You can't ask students to be respectful if you're dismissive to the front office staff. The leader sets the ceiling for the culture. The trust level will never rise above the leader's own behavior.
So we have these strategies: transparency, follow-through, two-way communication, modeling. But the source material touches on something really interesting here. It says, you don't build this trust in big town hall meetings. You build it in the micro moments.
The micro habits. This is my favorite part of this whole deep dive. We tend to think trust is built during the crisis or, during the big apology speech. But White argues it's built in the hallway hellos.
Hallway hellos. I love that term.
It's exactly what it sounds like. It's those 3 seconds between classes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you make eye contact? Do you use a student's name? When a teacher stops you with a quick question, do you physically stop and listen, or do you keep walking while answering over your shoulder?
Oh, keeping walking is a classic power move. It says, my destination is more important than your question.
Right, and that subtracts in the trust account. But stopping, turning, and engaging, that adds a penny to the account.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that 1,000 times, when the crisis hits, when something bad actually happens, you have a balance to draw from.
You have a buffer.
You have a buffer. If you have zero balance and a crisis hits, you go bankrupt immediately. The community turns on you because there is no relationship there to hold the weight of the failure.
Speaking of things going wrong, this brings us to the heaviest part of the source material, the trust recovery. Because we're human, we will drop the ball, we will be inconsistent.
This is the hard truth. Trust will break. In any complex system with hundreds of humans, you are going to mess up.
Yeah.
The test isn't perfection. The test is repair.
And the source outlines a protocol for this. It seems simple on paper. Own it, apologize, act.
Simple to say, excruciating to do.
Owning it is the part most leaders skip, isn't it? They spin it, they use the passive voice. Mistakes were made.
Passive voice is the enemy of trust. I made a mistake, creates safety. Mistakes were made, creates suspicion. But the crucial step here is the third one, action. An apology without a change in behavior isn't an apology. It's manipulation.
It's just PR.
Exactly. But here is the insight from Clarence C. that actually stopped me in my tracks. He dropped this reality check about the timeline of forgiveness. He said, you rebuild trust at the pace of the people you hurt.
At the pace of the people you hurt. And can we just sit with that for a second? Because that is a profound shifting of power.
It removes the control from the leader completely.
It does. And that's why it's so uncomfortable. Imagine you're a principal. You messed up, you apologized, you fixed the policy, you want to move on. You want everyone to stop being angry so you can get back to work. But you don't get to decide when they're done being angry.
That requires a level of patience that, frankly, most people in power just don't have.
It feels unfair to the leader's ego. I said sorry, why are you still mad?
It requires courage. The courage to sit in the discomfort. To just sit in the mess you made and wait. If you try to rush it, if you say, come on, let's move on, you just broke the trust all over again. Because now you're telling them that their feelings are an inconvenience to you.
It's like a physical injury. If I break your leg, I can't say, okay, I paid the hospital bill, now start running.
That is the perfect analogy. The bone heals when it heals. You can support the healing, you can create the conditions for it, but you can't force the timeline. And if you try to force a broken bone to bear weight too early, you just re-break it.
And you end up with a permanent limp.
That's what happens in organizations. They have a permanent limp because leadership never let the wound actually heal. They just taped over it and kept marching.
So if we're doing this work, if we're building the micro habits, repairing the breaks slowly, how do we know it's working? The source talks about measuring the invisible.
Yeah, this is the data challenge. How do you measure a vibe? Most leaders just rely on their gut. Oh, the hallway feels fine today. Or worse, they assume that silence equals approval.
Nobody is complaining, so we must be doing great.
That is the most dangerous assumption a leader can make. Silence is not safety. In a low-trust culture, silence is fear. People are keeping their heads down to avoid being targeted.
So how do we verify if we can't trust the silence?
You have to move from quantitative to qualitative? Sure, look at retention data. If you're hemorrhaging good teachers, don't look at the paycheck, look at the trust account. If families are pulling kids out, that's a trust metric.
But what about behavioral clues? Things you can see without a spreadsheet.
Engagement is the big one, and specifically, speaking up.
Noise.
Constructive noise. In a high-trust school, people argue, they debate. A teacher feels safe enough to say, I think this new policy is a bad idea. A student feels safe enough to say, I don't like how that guard treated me.
So if your staff meetings are dead silent and everyone is just nodding?
You're in trouble. That's compliance, not commitment. You want friction. Friction means people care enough to try to make it better and feel safe enough to voice it.
That really flips the script. We usually think a quiet ship is a tight ship, but actually, a noisy ship, constructively noisy, might be the safer one.
It's the canary in the coal mine. If the canary stops singing, get out. If the staff stops talking, the culture is dying.
This has been a really comprehensive look at something we usually just take for granted. We started with locks and cameras, and we realized that the real security system is how we treat each other in the hallway.
It totally reframes the mission. Trust isn't a soft skill, it's the operating system. Without it, the hardware is just a pile of expensive junk. But with a healthy OS, you can run any program. You can innovate, you can survive crises, you can actually teach kids.
It turns out the soft stuff is the hard stuff.
It's the hardest work you'll do.
Before we sign off, I want to leave our listener with a challenge. We talked about that powerful concept of trust recovery, rebuilding at the pace of the hurt.
It's the sticky idea of the episode for sure.
So here is the question for you to carry into your week. Where in your own life, not just at work, but maybe with your partner, your kids, or a friend, are you trying to rush a healing process? Where are you demanding normalcy because you are uncomfortable with the tension, rather than waiting for the other person to be ready?
That's the real work.
Stop the clock. Sit in the mess and see what happens. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.